All right, here's one of my sort of funny stories. It's not real funny. It gets bad. But in other words, Wheeee was across the street from my house. And the guy that owned the place, Harry Thompson, he would hire people, pay them half, and the government would pay them the other half. And these people could have one leg, one arm. Uh, they could have they could go into spasms and stuff. They're epileptic. And after a while, you get to know these people. They're not so bad, but they have their quirks. They can be really annoying. And I told you what he would do is if they were being a jerk, he'd walk them over to the time clock and he'd punch them out and tell them to go home and don't come back until you think like I do. And he'd kick them out. That was it. And they'd come back all humbled 3 or 4 days later because if they didn't work for him, he gave half the pay and then the state would give the other half. So as soon as they got kicked out, the secretary was notified, and she would notify the government the person wasn't coming for work. So they would straighten out. But we had this guy, and you look at each person, you'd say, why are they working here? So this guy's name was John Blonde, and he was Hungarian, and he stunk. He only took a bath maybe once a month, maybe. He smoked these menthol cigarettes, and the stench would creep up so many feet per week. And then he would take a shower. And everyone that had worked near him would complain his body odor was so bad. But he was really, really a pretty good technician as far as wiring up and following a diagram and stuff like that. And I worked with him, and I did wiring harnesses and stuff. And there was this one job, and I just said to him, look, if I had wired this up, as I wire it, I would be neater, and then when we have to bunch the wires up with tie wraps, I'd be able. But he'd wire these things up, and he could go through this machine and take these wires and route them together and put a tie wrap on them. It looked really good. I spent like 3 hours on one. He goes, you'll get better. I said, no, this is it. You're doing it. I'm not touching this anymore. But one of the things we noticed, we're sitting there, and he had a squeaky chair. And he'd be sitting in the chair smoking a cigarette. And he was the only, well, him and the other supervisors, the only ones allowed to smoke during working hours. So anyway, he'd go back for it. For months we put up with this, right? And he would play music as he's sitting there smoking with the squeaky noise of the chair. So he goes home, and this guy that cleaned the floors, Willie, he says, he was really bad today with that squeaky noise. I said, oh, I've already got that fixed. So I go over, and I had a bottle of spray lubricant, but I wanted to make sure when I sprayed it on the chair, you couldn't tell it's been lubricated. I was real neat with it. I used a rag. I double and triple checked it. I put the chair back. The next day, me and Willie are waiting, and he's over there. He lights a cigarette up, and he starts moving back and forth. You know that son of a bitch turned that chair over? He was trying to figure out why it didn't squeak anymore. Yeah, he was doing it on purpose. All right. So what became of John Blonde? All right. So John Blonde strung a woman along, promising to marry her back in Hungary. And then finally, when she's 50 years old, he goes to Hungary and tells her he's not going to marry her. He strung her along for 30 years. And then he came back, and my mother told me the story. I said, he's a doomed man. When you do that kind of stuff to somebody, karma's going to get you. So I left Wheeee at that point. And I knew about him talking about this girl, and he's going to go back to Hungary with money, and they're going to get married. And I'm like, how old is she? Well, anyway, at the point where he went back, and he told her, I'm not, she waited for him, and she got screwed. So he comes back home. My mother tells me the story. I'm starting to repeat myself because I'm getting old. And I'm sitting there, and my mother says, you won't believe what happened. I said, who was it? John Blonde. I said, did he go off the edge? Oh, man, John, you won't believe what happened. My mother's telling me. I said, how bad was it? Oh, he ain't ever coming back to work again. He had that chair. Remember that? He had that chair, and it had wheels. And he starts going around the shop, kicking it, and wee, like that. At first, they thought he was drunk, but then they called someone else. Wheeee had all these doctors that would just come down, and they go, "He's gone. He's absolutely gone. He never came back." All right, but he's going wee, wee. Yeah, the guilt of stringing that woman along. It only took like 3 weeks to get to him, and he's sitting there, and he's probably, he at some point he probably believed he was going to marry her, and he was going to get a lot of money in America and bring it back to Hungary. It didn't work out, and then he didn't know how to get out of it, and then but he could wire up machinery and stuff. It was amazing. And then we all use crimp tools and stuff like that. See, what he knew how to do, I knew when I was in high school. How to look at a diagram and run wires. And I was doing big post office wiring harnesses. See, wiring harnesses, all the wires that go on a machine. And they bring the machine up with all the pots and tubes at that time and transformers. And you drop this wiring harness in. And it had numbers on the end of each wire. And then it would go to a certain terminal strip, and you'd solder it, and the machine would be not instantly, but within a matter of minutes, you had the machine totally wired up. And the post office was getting into the eco stuff, and the wires for the wiring harness were all white. So, and there was a wiring harness. They put nails in a piece of plywood, and the wiring harness can be 6 to 8 feet long, and up and down, 4 foot, whatever. And you had a piece of paper with the number of each wire, and like you take a spool and you wrap around the outer nail. You wrap the wire. Then you run it down on this route, and then you come out. It'd be like 1A, 1A, 2A, 3A, and that would go to the left hand side connector wires would go from the left to the right. And you ran all these wires first, and then you stripped them, and you buzzed them out, and then you put the numbers on each wire. We had these strips. It was a little book, and you peel these back, and the number was on the strip maybe 4 times, and you just wrap that number around the wire. And the wires would get tinned and ready. Maybe sometimes you'd put a hook in them so the girl could really, wire it up quick at the other end. But I did those every day for months for the post office. They were building these new high-speed mail sorters, and that's what that harness went in. And when they tried this one company, they couldn't make any profit, so they went to us. We subcontracted it. We made money, and nobody could do the job. So I'd come in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We had split session in my high school, and I'd come in at 1 o'clock, and the boss would just point his head towards the wiring harness. I knew where I was going to be for 6 months until I got the job done. And they would come down. The post office guys would come down, and they go, "You got every one of your harnesses work." I said, "Well, I buzz out every one of them." And I told him what I was doing. He goes, "That's a lot of work." But I think we made $75 a harness, and they supplied the numbers, they supplied the wire. And that was a lot of money back then to make on each part that you've done. It's one person making it. And I could do one of them harnesses every hour. And there was a lot of wires, but it was all white. It's, but you got to make sure you're running it to the right place. And then there's a stripping gun thing we had, and then it had to be tinned. And sometimes you take the wiring harness off, and you give it to a girl, and she strips the ends, and the numbers are already there. And then you buzz it out later on. Before you go home, you buzz them out. It gets folded up, put in a box. But I worked some unbelievable. I'm thinking of another story with John Blond. I worked these incredible jobs, and I got really good. And they thought I was going to stay, but he was paying me $3.25 an hour. I got my first job at McGraw Edison $6 and something an hour. Well, I can't pay that much. Well, I'm not going to work here anymore. Anyway, uh, John Blonde was allowed to smoke, and he stunk. And then there would be this cloud of smoke all around him, almost like Pigpen on Charlie Brown. And the boss come up to me, he goes, I'm really tired of this. He goes, I want you to put a ventilation fan over here. I said, well, you can put a ventilation fan in sheetrock. You can, if you do it right. You don't. So he buys the fan, and I put it in there. Now it's 20 feet from him, from John Blonde, and he starts complaining. He wants the smoke and shit to be around him and the smell. So I put the fan on, and we had a switch, and he starts saying, but Harry, it's making a draft on my neck. So Harry went along with him. I went over to Harry and said, Harry, it's an exhaust fan. It's pulling the stink away from him and putting it into the parts room in the back. He goes, you're right. I said, there's nothing blowing on his neck. He wants that smell, his body odor, and the cigarette smell. It's like, and that's when I got the idea to oil his seat. I put that freaking fan in, and in between doing these wiring harnesses. Now, the only reason I was down there by stinky, but yeah, you can't, you say, don't say anything bad about the guy. He went nuts, but he deserved what he got. That poor woman, because he's telling me, oh, she's been waiting for me for 30 years. And I'm like, what? Yeah, we're going to get married. I'm like, how are you going to have kids? You're too old. It was sad. And like, I'm sitting at dinner table, and my mother goes to start talking, and who? John Blonde. How bad then it was it? Because he was, wee. He went. They had to actually come and take him and put him in a straitjacket. Unbelievable. Because it was a non thing here. We had people with those special shoes. They broke their leg and it would never set right. And we had all that. And a lot of the people that had bad car accidents, they were fine, but they could never work in a regular company where they had to stand for 8 hours or something like that. So they give them a job just twisting the ends of stranded wire, dipping it in flux, dipping it in a solder pot. Next wire. Yeah, they would sit there, and for 8 hours they would just tin wires. And then Harry would pay them X amount of money, and then the government would pay the rest. And they had some really sad stories. And one kid made the papers. Maybe I'll save that story for another time. But why do I have all these stories? Well, you never worked in Wheeee. You worked in a regular company, but you have stories too. But when you work around people, like I used to tell you, Kenny the Ferret Face. Now, even before Frank Burns on MASH, they called him Ferret Face. We had Ferret Face Kenny. When you looked at him, he looked like a rodent. And I told you the story. Boss comes up to me. This is what he would do to me. At lunchtime, run home and get a saw. Oh, on my lunchtime, I'm going to go across the street to my house and get a saw. Yeah. And come back, and Esther's got her car parked under the trees outside. I want you to cut the branches back so they don't rub on the car. Because we were having a really hot summer. So, all right. So I go home on lunch, right? I gobble down my food. I get a saw, and I go out, and I'm cutting this tree. And it's a choke cherry tree. It's a tree that when birds shit and the seeds come out of their ass, a tree grows. But the ferret boy comes over, and you're using the wrong kind of saw. You know how I do these voices? I have a problem with people like that they don't know their ass from hole in the ground. They don't know shit from Shinola. And you got the wrong kind of saw. I said, look, this is a weed tree. It's choke cherries. I think they might have called them blackberry also. It's a nothing tree. You're going to kill the tree if you don't use the right saw. He's going on and on and on and on. So finally, out comes Harry, and he's nodding. He likes the work I've done. And Kenny he goes over to Harry. He's going to kill the tree. Right? And Harry I think told him, shut up. And he took him over to the time clock, punched him out. He come back a week later with a different attitude. But the boss was merciless like that. He says, the only way you deal with handicapped people is you have to treat them just like a real person. You have to tell them you've crossed the line. And then if they don't stop, you do to them what that you would do to a regular person. But he would take them to the time clock. Yeah. No, Harry, don't send me over here to send them home. Yeah, you're using the wrong kind of saw. But I'd go right back to work. You know, I put the saw somewhere, and then at 4 o'clock I'd go home, take the saw home with me. Yeah, I lived across the street, and sometimes me and my mother would go home and have lunch at home just to get away from the. We had a little tiny cafeteria in the place. It was a sweatshop. But yeah, I just want to tell you, yeah, I fixed the seat so it wouldn't squeak. And then we did this other kid. What the hell was his name? Nevin Gargus or something like that. Up at TRW. Uh, we put a sound alert in this guy's tester, and every time you power it up, they put it in. I told them about the sound alert. They put it in, the engineering guys. So every time he powered it up, it would beep a couple times, and he couldn't find the sound alert. That was one of my tricks. A sound alert is made by Mallory. Go look it up. The real old ones were very expensive. I went to buy two at Lafayette Electronics, and the guy goes, I want to know what you're going to use these for. And I just told him, I said, you know, if you put a 9-volt battery on this thing, it'll sing for over a month. I said, I put them on a rope, and I throw them up in my neighbor's tree to make them crazy. What the hell are you asking me what I'm going to use the thing for? But I know the bad thing about a sound alert. Go look up what they are. They make a sound that no machinery makes. And it's the sound of the French fries are ready at McDonald's. That's a sound alert. Or a newer version of it. And the sound is at a certain frequency that nothing else makes that sound. And that's why Mallory came out with them. And so they're in the other room somewhere. I'd have to go run real quick, but I have them. I have miniature ones, and they have a piece of piezo crystal in them. There's no speaker, and the piezo crystal speaker in it is actually the resonant frequency. In other words, it is a crystal, and when it works, you can actually hear it. Okay, just go look it up. It's really cool stuff. And yeah, the guy goes, what are you going to use these for? So I made up a story real quick. The look on that guy's face. Yeah, you know, if you hook this to a 9-volt battery and throw it up in your neighbor's tree, it whistles for over a month. Yeah, I'm sick. But yeah, poor John Blonde. Well, I have a girlfriend back in Hungary. Really? You're not married? No, we're going to get married. Stupid guy. Oh, and then the chair. Then the next morning, he's going nuts. And Willie's over on the other side. He's almost collapsing on the floor. But I said, when I put the oil in there, I got to make sure he doesn't see it. He flips that chair over. And he can't see it because I made sure ahead of time. You know? And I didn't dare walk up to him and say, what's wrong, John? Yeah, that I do that now. I'll do that now to you after I screwed you over. Oh, are you okay? Yeah. Harry, the fan is on my neck. I can't work. And then I'm Harry, it's an exhaust fan. And Harry goes over there. He can't feel the draft. I said, it's not the draft. We're taking his smell away. And Harry's like, the guy's got a body odor like unbelievable. And it creeps up. It's a foot. It moves every week or so. It's a foot more. Where if you sit and you got to move because it's gross. It's body odor and menthol cigarettes. And I told the guy, and he goes, send him home, make him take a bath. But he didn't. But yeah, he got his at the end. Strung that woman along. Whee! Yeah, I got the stories because I worked in places you would never work in. I think that's all. That's it. All right. That's it.